The next speaker we have is Dr. Stanley Shapiro. He's from Rutland, works at the Rutland Medical Center up in Burlington at the University Medical School. Has been on the board of governors for the American College of Cardiology, and his presentation will focus on the health effects of wind turbines.
Hey,
Welcome.
thanks a lot. So I'm here tonight to provide a little bit of information and to share with you some information about how various stresses affect the human body, particularly when it comes to heart and vascular disease. And I'm going to outline for you tonight a little bit in the way of how certain types of stresses, psychological stress and sleep deprivation, can affect your heart and your blood vessels. If I could have the first slide. Just to introduce myself, my most important characteristic is that I married a native Vermonter who came from a 500 cow farm, and we have 3 children that are native Vermonters, so that's about as close as I get to. That's pretty close, though. And I also want to make it quite clear tonight that I'm speaking on behalf of my own work, my own observation, and not with the wonderful hospitals and organizations that I have the privilege of being affiliated with. I also want to point out my friend Steve here, Steve Terry. Steve worked with me at Porter Hospital in Middlebury for 20 years. He served as chairman of the board of trustees there. I was the cardiologist and director of special care. So there's, you never know how you cross paths with your friends when you're working in different areas, and it's, but you get to meet a lot of people of high integrity and of great effort. I also would like to point out tonight that we're going to take a little bit of a journey into some concepts that might not initially seem that they're germane to this very complex issue of wind and wind turbines and how they affect your life. So, just to start out, the relationships between emotions and heart disease are really important, and they go back to antiquity. From the time of Plato through the Middle Ages, people have felt that there's a real linkage between the mind and your physical body. And that's very important. This fellow, John Hunter, he was a member of the Scottish Parliament in the 1600s. And he said, "My life is at the mercy of any scoundrel who chooses to put a passion in me." And then he dropped dead. So your emotions play very heavily into your life. Now, this has been validated in the medical literature and the cardiology literature. This article, The Association of Psychosocial Risk Factors with First Heart Attacks, 26,000 patients, 25,000 patients that were involved in this study. The reason that I put this slide up is because I really want you to understand there is a completely bona fide standard of medical practice that relates psychosocial distress, emotional distress, to having heart disease. Next slide. Now, this was an unbelievable effort, and what made this study so important to people all throughout the world is that it involved 262 hospitals in 52 countries, and it cut across the swath that you didn't have to be rich, you didn't have to be poor, you didn't have to be a man or a woman. If you had tremendously perceived stress at work, home, financial distress, stressful life events, depression, perceived disempowerment, that is, your voice doesn't matter, nobody cares about you, that was associated with the risk of an acute heart attack. And that's very important for all of us to understand, because it relates back probably to the most important rule that we all live by. Does anybody know what that rule is? It's the golden rule. Don't do unto anyone what you wouldn't want done to yourself. That really has to guide, in my mind, all behavior and all morality. Next slide. Now, I love showing this slide because it represents a cross-section of everybody that's in this room tonight. This is a slide of the timeline of atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is that process by which your arteries, over the years, develop some plaque and they develop hardening. So if you look at the way this is schemed out in your, in the first decade of life, as you can see here, this artery is nice and open. And it has this mild little group of cells, which are known as the endothelium. Now, this is a medical term. Endothelium means cells that line the inner lining of the artery. This is so critically important because the goal of life and the goal of avoiding heart problems is to keep your endothelium like Teflon as opposed to becoming like Velcro. When it becomes like Velcro, it begins to adhere these little cells. Now, you all see these little round dots that are in the atheroma, which is the underlying plaque. These are fatty streaks that develop. This is cells, active body cells. These are white blood cells. Many of you go to the doctor, they check to see if you have anemia. Well, white blood cells are those cells that protect you when you have an infection. They're your guardian cells. Now, interestingly enough, they can also serve the body by being sources of inflammation in the artery. So, if you have cells that are subjected to high cholesterol, smoking, shear forces, physical shear forces of high blood pressure, diabetes where there's extra sugar on board, and a variety of other circumstances, these cells become what we call highly inflamed. So imagine an infection, a cut, inflammation. Now, when they become highly inflamed, if there's high levels of lipid or cholesterol, they begin to burn out, and they deposit cholesterol ester, and this is how plaque builds up. So now we're from the third decade, our 30 and 40-year-olds, we're getting into our fourth decade and closer to our 50-year-olds. 59 is the age when the highest amount of cardiac sudden death occurs, and it occurs because of plaque ruptures. A plaque rupture is an inflammatory event that is superimposed upon high levels of cholesterol and high levels of risk. Now, the important point to take home is this. The more risk factors you have, the higher your risk of having trouble later on. I would expect that every one of you in this room has gotten a lecture from your doctor at least once to that effect. Is that correct? Can I see a show of hands? I didn't see too many hands go up. I hope that's better. But the point really is that, and this is what you need to understand, the higher the lipids, the worse the blood pressure, the worse the diabetes, the more you smoke, the more likelihood you're going to have trouble. And as I showed you just a minute ago, next slide, the more psychosocial stress, the more you are going to also have increased levels of cardiac events occurring. Now, nocturnal angina is described as chest pain that occurs in the middle of the night. I'm sure some of you have woken up with chest pain in the middle of the night. Hopefully, it's that you just need to go take a Tums and everything's going to be okay. Other times it really heralds a pretty serious event. And there are multiple causes of why people will develop chest pain in the middle of the night. And they are because of obstructive sleep apnea. You know, everybody's learning about sleep now, and people have to wear certain devices to help them. There are surges that occur in REM sleep of the nervous system that just discharge. Sleep is the repository of where your daily activities go. I'm sure every single one of us in this room has had the experience of at least lying in bed once at night where we couldn't go to sleep, where we just twisted and turned for various reasons. Now, usually it comes from some anxiety. We're worried about something, something's on our mind. Some people may have been kept up by a dripping faucet. Some people may have been kept up by other types of happenstances. But what I would like you to understand is that sleep is a very precious commodity. And if it is disordered, it leads to further heart problems. Next slide. Now, this is a very complex slide, but basically what this slide is telling you is that there are significant interactions that occur with the mind and the body, as I pointed out before. And these are very well-defined physiological pathways. By physiological pathways, I mean how the body works to affect different types of heart functions. So that if you get really wired and jacked, your heart is affected by your autonomic nervous system and begins to beat very fast. For some people, they get a lot of fright and their heart goes fast. For some people, they get flight where they want to withdraw and they go, oh my God, this is, and then they get to faint and they pass out. This is germane to our topic tonight, because if you don't get enough sleep at night, it really leads to a disordering of all of the functioning of your cardiovascular system to some degree. Everybody's different. Some people are affected more, some people are affected less. Okay? And this also affects stress hormones. It affects those white blood cells, the immune cells that I was talking to you about, which then affect the blood vessels, which also affect the platelets, which are those little sticky things that we try to prevent by putting people on aspirin and on other medications. So, next slide. It underscores that if you do not get good sleep, you are going to have increased risk. Just like if you eat poorly, you're going to have increased risk from heart disease as well. Our sleep, our eating, our drinking, our emotional lives, this is the stuff of what makes heart disease, which is the #1 killer in this country. Over 1 million people die every year of heart attacks. And it requires an enormous amount of effort to manage it. So this is a paper that was just published in June of 2009, this past year. Comes out of Harvard University. And what they did in this paper was to summarize the cardiovascular, inflammatory, as I pointed out to you, and metabolic consequences of sleep deprivation. And what this paper did was to review all of the literature that has been written about that shows why worsening sleep may have a profound effect on your heart. Now, sleep also has effects on other disease states, but as a cardiologist, I'm just going to speak to that which I know about. Next slide. Now, this is another paper, and the title of this paper is called The Effect of Sleep Loss on C-reactive protein, an inflammatory marker of cardiovascular risk. This is an important paper because it underscores that inflammation. Remember the slide I showed you about those white cells and its relationship to the development of plaque and ultimately the plaque rupture. So, if you have sleep loss, your C-reactive protein, which is a blood test, which is a marker, rises. And many of you probably have had a C-reactive protein taken by your doctors, because that does give some indication as to whether or not you need to be treated more aggressively for your risk factors. Next slide. So what does this have to do with wind turbines? Why am I up here talking about this tonight? There's been a lot of talk about health issues in wind turbines and what they do. And I'll be really quite honest with you. Many of those questions about wind turbines are ones that I couldn't answer, nor would I try to answer. But I am really confident and able to answer questions regarding the issues around sleep. Now, there's a doctor up in Mars Hill, Maine, who did a very small study. This is not a major scientific study. These just are not available when it comes yet to the health consequences of wind. Now, in Dr. Nissenbaum's study, he did a controlled study. He asked people who lived within 1,100 meters of wind turbines a variety of questions. He then went out to 5,500 meters, so about 5 times the distance, and asked those ask the same questions to a control group. And I will emphasize to you, these aren't large numbers, but they're striking conclusions that merit further attention. Let me say that again. It merits further attention. Do not ignore studies like this. So 82% of the people who lived within 1,100 yards of the wind turbines reported worsened sleep disturbances compared to 3% of the control. Those are big numbers. This stuff is available online, by the way. 36% reported headaches, 55% reported stress, anger, and worsened depression. 95% of the subjects perceived a reduced quality of life. Underlying these findings, 25 new prescription medications were offered to study subjects, of which 15 were accepted compared to 4. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that this represents a population group or statistical significance, which is really how we practice medicine. But it's a very interesting initial observational study. It's really probably the first one that's been done. If you go online, there is so much stuff on the potential health effects and through various different organ systems. But I think that we really need to pay some attention to this. Because if we're at the very beginning of the issue of wind turbines in this state. There are very few projects. The one down in Searsburg is a very small project. The turbines are very small. The ones we're talking about now are really quite large. And so I believe from this initial type of information that we should just be really careful about how we go about planning this so that we do not begin to run into problems that are initially suggested by this Mars Hill information. Now, what else do we have to go on that there are concerns that people raise about living near wind turbines and health? And what we really only have are the voices of those people who have stated that they have suffered because they have lived near turbines. Those voices need to be heard. They also need to be validated. You know, people have a lot of things to say, but I really believe that one of the worst things that we can do, especially in medicine, one of the worst things you can do in medicine, is to not take someone seriously. Now, many of the people who have uttered that they have had their lives disturbed because they lived in too much proximity to wind turbines, they should be countenanced. They should be having the people who put wind turbines asking them what happened. They should be having their stories collated. They should be having their legislators being concerned enough to believe the fact that they may have something that needs to be addressed and helped out. So we're not saying that wind is bad or that wind turbines are bad. We're not saying that wind energy is a modality that shouldn't be considered. But we are saying, or at least I'm saying, that let's listen carefully to those people who cry out for help. Let's begin to think that if in a small study these types of circumstances can occur, then we need to pay attention and we need to validate it. Next slide. Now, the conclusions of Mars Hill were the following. That people living in 1,100 meters suffer higher incidence of sleep disturbance and headaches, as I heard, and dysphoric psychiatric symptomatology. They had more need for prescription medications. And they stated that this had to do with the noise of the turbines that they heard. Investigation should take place. The main medical societies called for more studies. And I think that being proactive and trying to figure out the relationship between noise science and potential health issues is something that's worthwhile doing before we commit to having very large projects that will affect people. Next slide. So this just summarizes the potential heart effects that I talked a little bit about that occur when people have sleep disturbance. The nervous system has its irregularity, inflammatory proteins increase, there's higher blood pressure, there's more sympathetic drive, that is the adrenaline drive, there's more inflammation, There's a potential for increased arrhythmias. We are very concerned about this in patients that have sleep apnea. There's an increase in stress hormones, and there was a potential increase in heart attacks when you can't sleep. And actually, it does occur. Go ahead, next slide. So, I'm going to conclude by saying, where should we go from here? We should all recognize and be respectful that the intersection of public health and renewable energy is brand new. So let's open up our minds to the possibilities and conduct ourselves in a fashion, not to accuse someone of saying, oh, you're crazy because you're complaining about this, or to say that this does not happen. We need to know. We need to do some work to figure this out. My personal feeling right now is that the issue of siting should be addressed. And that can be an area of collaboration between developers and between people who live in areas. Justin spoke into issues of compensation before. That may be one of the answers if it turns out that siting of a wind turbine would cause potential psychological or sleep disturbance. I think that any publicly sanctioned activity that results in sleep deprivation is somewhat an unacceptable risk for people that might endure it. I understand the concept of the public good. Very few people get affected. Well, if very few people are affected, then those people should in some way be given some care and compensation for their suffering. My feeling is that for industrial wind to succeed as a renewable energy, health considerations should be put at the forefront. And since we know so little about them, let's give it some time and do some study. There's a lot to learn, and closing off further research, in my mind, is unconscionable. And I have to say that the position paper that was published by ANWIN, American Wind Association, and Canadian Wind Association, where they said that we don't need to do further research, I'm really sorry. I strenuously object to that concept. And I would hope that we will all care enough about the people that are affected and care enough about our communities that when we do these projects, which will perhaps have great benefit in the long run, that we do it in a way where we all work together and that we do it so that people don't get hurt. Thank you very much.